Okay, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Is there a laser pointer? Sorry.
Yes, it was somewhere, the pointer, and now I'm missing it. No, it is not here. Yes.
Yes, sorry about that.
I will bring it, so you can start.
Okay, yes. So my today's topic is the circumstellar environment of B-bracketed supergiants. This is, let's say, a sort of a mini quest to resolve the question regarding the circumstellar structure around these stars, either disks or rings. This is in collaboration with Michaela Kraus and Anna Red, that you know very well already, and a few other people that you can see in summary here. So what I'm going to do is to give a small introduction about these stars, because Michaela has given a thorough description for these systems like a few weeks ago, so I will not get into too much detail about that. And I will mainly try to present the most recent results, even some of them yesterday, that we have on these systems regarding their optical spectroscopy. So, as a small introduction, what's the definition of the B-bracket phenomenon? So, this was given by Conti in 1976. The B-bracket classification designates those stars of spectral type B which show forbidden emission lines in the optical spectrum, where the notation bracketed follows for forbidden lines. Now, this has, after some iterations, have been defined a bit better by Lammers. So we say that a B-bracketed system belongs to this class if it presents a strong Balmer emission lines, low excitation permitted emission lines of predominantly low ionization metals in the optical spectrum, like iron mostly. Also, forbidden emission lines in iron and oxygen in the optical spectrum, and usually they present also a strong near or mid-infrared excess due to the hot circumstellar dust. Of course, if somebody takes into account all these 4 points, he can find a variety of systems that can fulfill all these 4 points at the same time. So, in summary, you can have systems like B-bracket supergiants, which are evolved stars. You can have pre-main sequence stars. You can have compact planetary nebula. You can have also symbiotic B stars, B-bracket type stars. And there is a large part of this general class of stars that don't belong to either of these 4 classes. So they are cumulative, described as unclassified B-bracketed stars. Here is an example of optical spectrum for a B-bracketed supergiant. This here is S134, and you can see all this forest of lines of permitted and emission lines in iron, in oxygen, and broad emission in H-alpha. So, why we are interested in this? Why we are interested in this class of objects? B-bracket supergiants, if we put them in a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, belong close to another class of supergiant stars. Here I saw some evolutionary tracks derived from Ekstrom, which include some rotation at the initial stage of the stars. And you can see here with bold lines is the main sequence, and then the evolution along with time. So in this plot you can see that we have yellow supergiants around here, red supergiants. You have also luminous blue variables and Wolf-Rayet here. Now the B-bracketed supergiants belong also to this general category of stars that exhibit an extreme mass loss, and it is questionable where we can put them around this plot. I mean, there are studies that show that these stars belong to pre-main, post-red supergiant or pre-red supergiant stages. So their evolution stage is a bit unclear. At the same time, due to the fact that they belong to a transitional phase where we have extreme mass loss, this is critical in order to determine the final products out of these phases, which are actually the progenitors of the supernova. So our knowledge around these stars, along with the rest of the class, of course, is important in order to understand the mass loss in the evolved stars. The proposed SIM for these systems has been derived already from Zwickgraf in 1985, and it looks something like this. We have the star has a spherical, has an asymmetric wind actually. There is a high velocity, low density line-driven wind along the pole, but at the same time we have a higher density but of lower outflow velocity equatorial ring around this axis. This disk is dense enough in order to allow also for the dust production. Although this scenario is valid, somebody can question if the profile that we can get from the lines that originate from the disk is indeed due to an outflowing wind or a rotational or a Keplerian rotation ring. In general, somebody cannot really distinguish the difference in the profile between these two scenarios. So, if we have a spectral line that presents such a profile, it's not easy to determine which of these is true. Now, in order to resolve this, we have to define more tracers, which means to find more lines that present this kind of profiles that could give us the rotational velocity and in that way probe different regions. In order to do that, there was a series of papers in which Krauss et al. Have examined and have studied what's the influence between the outflow wind scenario and that of a Keplerian rotation. What they found is that actually we can get these emission lines of oxygen. These emission lines of oxygen can be produced in the same environment where we have a neutral hydrogen outflowing disk. The ionization level for oxygen and hydrogen is more or less the same, but this dense environment provides the number of electrons which can collisionally excite these lines. So within the same environment we can have actually emission lines. Now the ratio of these two lines is sensitive to the temperature and the density. So even though we have an outflow neutral disk, we have emission in different regions according to the temperature and the density. Along with these oxygen lines, calcium lines also offer the possibility to be used as tracers for these regions. Calcium lines can be produced almost at the same region, close to this line, very close to the star, while oxygen 6300 can be produced a bit further. So having this kind of tracers, we can probe different densities and we can start seeing different parts of the disk. As I said, the study showed that there is no direct indication for outflow of the wind, but it can be reproduced and it can be explained through Keplerian rotation, like it is in Keplerian rotation. In order to further verify this, further observational evidence comes from a study by Arete et al. In 2012, where they examined 8 sources in the Magellanic Cloud. In all these sources, they managed to identify the calcium 2 lines this doublet. In all, these lines are systematically present in all stars. Moreover, they present systematically double peak profiles, which is indicative of the Keplerian rotation. So, with this mini survey, they prove that the calcium lines, along with the oxygen lines, are good traces for the disk regions. Driven by this survey, we went on to extend our sample by initiating a systematic campaign, spectroscopic campaign, both in optical, using mainly Ferrous instrument, and infrared spectrographs in order to detect other tracers in the near infrared. So far, we have data since 1999 up to now, and the project is still ongoing. We have a better monitoring, a very systematic monitoring in the last 3 years due to the big project from the Astronomical Institute in Czech Republic. With this, we had one run in 2014 and 2 runs last year and this year, and there are various ISO programs that contribute with observations. Our monitoring sampling consists of 12 objects in the galaxy and 11 objects in the Large Magellanic Cloud, and Small Magellanic Cloud is represented by 5 objects. Now, we'll mainly talk about the optical spectra, so just a few words about the data reduction. We are using the Ferrous pipeline data as they come out of the telescope, actually. We are usually combine the spectra in order to increase the signal-to-noise ratio. We identify, eliminate cosmic ray back columns, and we, last but not least, we perform the telluric correction. For example, you can see here that with the blue, you can see the original spectrum as it comes out from the spectrograph, and these are the telluric lines. By taking a telluric spectrum, telluric standard star, we can correct for this telluric emission by removing any spectral lines from the standard. So we can correct the initial spectra for the telluric absorption of the atmosphere. Now we'll start discussing the results by presenting at the beginning some new identifications. These new identifications refer to objects, to B bracket supergiants that don't have in the literature reference regarding the calcium line, the calcium and the oxygen lines. So in this case, we have one object in the Small Magellanic Cloud and 3 in the Large Magellanic Cloud. You can see the broad H alpha component, the broad H alpha here in emission. Then you can see the triplet of calcium line. This line is coupled with this forbidden emission, but they probe different densities. This is much further out in the disk than this, which is much closer to the star. And also we see oxygen, which is present in all cases, but not here, and the calcium line. So we see that in all cases we do see the line, so we do see signatures of the disk for these stars. Moreover, we can see that most of them are double peak, which means that we can see the rotation of the material around the star. Moreover, since we have initiated a systematic campaign, so our observations are done in different epochs, we can start investigating variability. So if we have more than a few observations, you can see if the intensity or the profile of the lines change with time. Now, these are 2 preliminary results regarding S18 in SMC and S22 in LMC. You can see that in both cases, H alpha varies with time, the intensity in both stars, and we have also variation in the other lines, and in some cases we have also differences in the profile, like the switch of the bit here or a totally different profile in these cases, for example. What is interesting is that this variability now that I present is something like within months. I mean, the first observation is in 2014, we obtained in November, and 2015 in May. So you see that even within 6 months, there is a difference in the profiles and the intensities. However, this, as I said, are more or less preliminary results, so more work needs to be done with this. However, we have been working on a specific star in the last few months. So these are what we can see as far as the variability in all lines regarding LH7-120S73. In contrast, first of all, what we can get from the general picture here is that we can see that the system is more or less the same throughout all observations. And if you can see, I hope you can see that this is 1999 and the last observation is 2015. So we span almost 16 years and more or less the system doesn't change at all. There are a few variations perhaps that you can see here, but this perhaps I couldn't trust that because it could be also to the telluric removal. But in general, you can see that this line, which is much stronger, is stable. Also the calcium lines, and H-alpha is extremely stable. We can see also at the same time that we do have presence of 1577 line. So we do see this line on this star. So we went on to investigate the kinematics, which means to determine what are the velocities that we can find in this, that we find due to this profile broadening for these lines. For this, we are using a purely kinematic model in which we take into account the rotational velocity plus a Gaussian component which is convolved, and this Gaussian component has to do with the spectral broadening due to the spectrograph itself, some thermal movement and some turbulence movement, which is a random movement of the particles along the line of the side. So by taking these two values and convert them, we can go on and calculate the velocities and how the profile of these rings would look like. In this case, we are talking about a ring which is detached. It is around the star and it has a specific velocity. And we try to investigate how many, if one ring can fit that, or if there are more rings that could fit the total profile of this line. In total, we examine all these three tracers, starting by the 5577 oxygen line. We can fit this with 45 kilometers ring and 26. This represents the red represents the wider ring, which means higher velocity, which actually means that it is closer to the star. And we can, from this we can get that we need two rings in order to explain the total profile of this line. Again, we need two rings with a bit different velocities to describe the oxygen line at 6,300. And we need also two lines in order to describe these two, in order to fit the profile of the calcium line. What that means is that we need two rings of, means that these lines are produced in two rings at least in every case. Now, of course, these values are not uncorrelated in the sense that we can get emission from calcium and oxygen more or less at the same ring. So you can see that actually we have monogap value at 17, 22, 26, which could be more or less the same region, and another value close to 33 to 40. If we try to put this in a more visual image, we try to visualize this, then we would get something like this. Of course, do not get for granted that this is something scaled, right? It's just only for visualization purposes. So we have calcium and oxygen emission, as I said, at 39 kilometers per second, very close to the star. Then we have oxygen a bit further, and we have also again another two rings a bit further away. What is interesting also is that from infrared observations we can get also CO emission at this velocity. Now, according to the analysis of Klaus et al. In a paper that has just been submitted, we have calculated that if we take if we calculate for a total mass of 27 solar masses, then we can interpret these velocities to distances along the star, so away from the star. So we can see that this number corresponds to the detached rings from which we have this emission, these emissions. So again at 15, 20, 45, and 93. In total, we will say that what we argue actually is that we can replicate the emission lines in the circumstellar environment for this star with, by taking into account 4 rings around its circumstellar material. Now, proceeding to some galactic objects, another object that we are following is HD 62623. Again, we can see that there are oxygen, calcium lines here also, H alpha. Now, this is a feature that needs further investigation. I think it doesn't relate really with the 5577 oxygen line. It should be something else. But nevertheless, we see that the star presents very stable profiles along 2008 up to 2015. There are some variations in the profile, and the most important variation is at the blue part of the wing in H alpha. By doing the same exercise, by going back and trying to see which velocities can fit these profiles, we get again 2 rings for its calcium and oxygen line. These are the derived values, very close together. And if we combine this with CO emission, we can get something like this. So in this case, we have calcium and oxygen emission at 76 kilometers per second. Then there is another ring that has both lines along with CO at 50 to 53 kilometers per second, and another ring a bit outside on SiO emission, silicon. Now, I haven't, of course, I haven't gone to fully interpret this in distances, so I have been working on the kinematic and to derive the velocities so far, so that's why you will not see any other distances in here. So in this case, we can interpret this the circumstellar material that has something like 3 rings around the star. Working a bit more with more stars in the sample, we get to CPD minus 52, 92, 43. In this case, we do have a lot of epochs of observations, and we see a lot of variation in the intensity, and there is some variation also in the profile in general. Now, we don't see anything at 5577. This is not very trustworthy. Also, this is a broader feature that probably has nothing to do with the line itself. We get the 6,300, 6,300. This line is probably influenced by a deep absorption feature, so that's why the profile is almost destroyed. But we can see that for the rest of the lines, we get something which is consistent regarding the width. But we do see variations slightly in the intensity and at the profile. By doing exactly the same work, we try to fit the emission lines again. We get these values, 53, 35, almost the same for the oxygen, which if we put it again to this visualize scene, we get actually two rings around the star in which calcium and oxygen lines are produced at a closer distance at 53 kilometers per second, and calcium along with some molecules a bit outside. Now, working on another star, it's the 327083, we can get again variation in the profiles. We don't see anything at this line. We get a variation here. We get some intensity variation also in H alpha and on this blue wing. However, in this case, we have to note that HD 327083, it's a binary system. So in this case, we do see some variability also, which is influenced by the spectral lines of the companion. So in this case, the lines probably are affected by the existence of the binary of the companion also. However, we can get more or less consistent fits to the lines again, and according to these values, and if we again take into account the CO emission, we have the following picture. We get calcium and oxygen and CO at the ring, very close. Then we get some silicon oxide a bit further away, and an outside ring of calcium and oxygen again. Now moving to the last star that I would like to discuss is this CPD-572874. Now you see actually here only one observation. We don't have many, but there are a few data sets yet to be reviewed. Again, in this case, we don't see anything on this oxygen line, but we get for sure something on these lines. We get a double peak calcium line, so we can go on and again fit the profiles. Now, for this case, we have to model the profile not using only two rings, but we have to take into account a multiple ring system actually. So for the calcium line, we have to take 4 rings with these values here, and for oxygen we need another 4 rings also, but in a bit different velocities. In order to better visualize this, because I think this is not very helpful, we have something like this. So we have calcium and CO very close to the star, also silicon oxide here, and then we have also another set of rings outside. So in this case we have a multiple ring system around the star. In total, I would say that in the circumstellar environment around the B bracket supergiants is very complex, as we can see. We can use emission lines like oxygen, calcium, CO, and silicon oxide in the infrared in order to probe different regions of temperature and density, so we can see how the disk of this star is constructed. We can get information about the kinematics of these lines, and we can identify so far emission from single or multiple equatorial rings. Of course, this raises the question if we really see something that has rings or disks. So far, the image that we have is that these rings can really fit and explain the line properties in these stars. but we would like to get more traces, more elements that could define other regions also. And of course, there's a big question if there's any unified image along this pattern, if these supergiants follow really something that could be uniform for all this. As I said, we have initiated a campaign for a large number of galactic and Magellanic big bracketed supergiants. We acquire more and more observations. We try to do this in a homogeneous approach, and we, having the ability to observe many epochs, give us the opportunity and the privilege actually to monitor the activity. You can check, is there any variability in optical or infrared? Is there any connection actually also, this is a big question, to mass loss history? This question is open, how exactly the supergiants form the disks, and if these are related to, and if these structures could be related to mass loss events, as we know that during this phase they lose a lot of mass. And actually, I hope that this will be summarized in work in progress, for which you have seen the first preliminary results. And I think that's it.
Thank you. So, time for questions. Yeah, Harry, please.
What about inclination angle?
Yes.
The problem is that if two peak spectral lines, then these stars must be almost equator one relative to us. And what about the statistics in this aspect?
Well, there is, first of all, we are using inclination. There are measured inclination angles for some of them. I mean, for all the stars that I saw, we have inclination angles measured. So this is fixed. So we go on with a fixed inclination angle and we perform the kinematical modeling. Now, we don't have, unfortunately, the inclination angles for all of them. I think there should be 4 or 5 for galactic and a few for the Magellanic sources. So for the rest, we can get only an upper limit. So it's not derived totally yet for all of them. The difficulty is that in order to check and measure the inclination angle, we have to be able to see the photospheric lines. And this is not easy, because you have a very rich environment which hinders the photospheric lines. So it's not an easy task. But for this that I saw, it is true that depending on the inclination angle, you can get a different profile, of course. But perhaps this is something that I should mention, that we know the inclination angle, so this has been fixed, and we are working only on the best velocities that could fit the profile.
Inclination angles are obtained with interferometry, right? Not in this work.
Not in this work, no. No, this has been taken from another
source.
Yes.
Yeah. More questions? Indrek, please.
When you select the number of rings or circles to match the observed profiles, there is not only the number of rings and the fixed rotational velocity, but also the intensity.
Yes,
this intensity should be another parameter to match.
It is true that this is a free parameter. That's
so
I select the parameter to fit.
So I think that the number of rings and the rotational velocity which you derive is not unique. It depends on the intensity.
There could be some redundancy in some parameters.
Yeah.
That is true. This is something that we are looking into this, because, for example, another implication is the Gaussian profile, which means that you have a ring which is not, of course, an ideal line. It has a width. So how long is this width, and how it interacts, or if it touches the other ring, so that in order to have a continuous. This is something that we are working on right now. It seems that this is not the case, because then you will have to define also some physical parameters in order to better model that, which is not the case right now. It's mostly kinematic model so far. You have to know also the physical parameters, which is not easy.
Okay, Arvid had one more question.
In principle, all supergiants have very strong stellar winds. Can be so that there is a mixing something of both the phenomena, rings and winds.
Still, you do have a strong stellar wind, especially on the polar. Polar, you do have the wind there. It's not. It definitely fits with the model, with the rest of the observations. It's that you have also an outflowing disk creating close to the equator. Now, there are a few hypotheses how you create this with bistability jump models or with slow wind model. There is some improvement in general, but you can create an outflow disk which seems to be separated with the rest of the wind. But you do have the wind on the polar regions. It's definitely a question how they manage to create such a disk, which is cool enough also to get all these elements and to get also to dust.
And a stable disk.
And a stable disk, yes.
More questions? Okay, then thank you very much.